Chers collègues,
good afternoon, colleagues. In this second session, we will be looking in more detail at gender equality policies and the representation of women and men in national parliaments in the European Union. Women and men each constitute half of the global population. There is therefore no reason to discriminate against either of those groups. They need to be treated on an equal footing. Gender equality is a fundamental and universal right. It needs to be incorporated into all aspects of public life in order to build a society which is fairer, more inclusive, more open, and more respectful of human dignity. In politics, the equal participation and involvement of women and men is essential for democracy, justice, social progress, and good governance. It's therefore key that gender equality be promoted in the political and administrative workings of parliaments in the member states of the European Union. The representation of women is getting better, but change has been slow. We can't be content with this progress given the fact that our society is constantly evolving. Specific commitments to gender equality in all areas of political life, such as equal access to political office, fighting gender stereotypes, equal and meaningful participation in at all levels of governance, as well as transparency by means of statistics on the representation of men and women within democratic institutions. These are all of the principles and targets that will allow us to put gender equality in politics into practice. In Belgium, together with my colleague, the President of the Senate, together with our departments, we carried out a cross-cutting screening which was unprecedented, looking at all aspects of parliamentary life and the internal workings of the Belgian parliament based on gender. And the results of this show how necessary it is to have more determination to achieve more equality. And based on that, we developed a strategy and we put forward recommendations. These have been put into a gender plan, and very soon they will be put into focused on the gender perspective. For example, we have changed the statute for staff, taking into account the gender perspective in internal promotions. And also, this is the issue of candidates in the service. There's also a parliamentary mission that has been reviewed to ensure diversity in parliamentary delegations. Today, we're all here today, and we need to work hand in hand. We need to show commitment towards reforms and towards strengthening participation of women at all levels. I hope that from these exchanges we will see relevant and innovative projects to improve participation of women and also move towards a more balanced and more respectful society. I also encourage you strongly to support the joint declaration for a commitment to more gender-sensitive parliaments, and the COSAC contribution will be an integral part of this. The final text will be sent to you once we've finalised our work. I call on all of the delegations to co-sign this delegation. I'm counting on your full and honest support. As Tulia Axon said, who's the president of the IPU and the Speaker of the Parliament in the United Republic of Tanzania, more women in Parliament means more inclusive and representative institutions. This means stronger and healthier democracies. We need to encourage young women and girls that although it's a tough job, they deserve to have a seat at the table, to become decision makers, and to help improve people's lives through their work. And that's the end of the quote. Before we hear from our key speakers in this session, I'd like to give the floor to the permanent member of the COSAC Secretariat, who will present the results of the biannual report on the gender policy chapter. Thank you very much in advance, Mr. Chauvel.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Honourable Chair, Madam State Secretary, guests, honourable members. The second chapter of the biannual report of COSAC is precisely on this topic that will be debated here today now, gender policy and the representation of women and men in Parliament. Let me highlight a few findings from the report. In the first several questions of the second chapter, Parliaments and Chambers were asked to provide some statistics on the percentages of males and females in Parliament, both on a political level and on an administrative level. And on the political level, the results of the questionnaire presented in the report indicate that on average, among those parliaments and chambers who replied, 32% of members of Parliament are female. The percentage of females ranges from 14% to 46%. The percentages of male members is naturally reverse of these numbers. Looking instead at the percentages of male and female committee chairs, the average among those who replied is that 28 are female. 28%, sorry, not 28 people. Here there's a wider span between respondents that ranges between no female chairs at all to 62% of chairs being female. On the administrative side, I will here limit myself to noting that on a general management level within the different administrations, on average among the replies received, approximately 49% of managers are female, and that the percentage of females in management positions ranges from 28 to 87%. Lastly, I will conclude by noting that this chapter also contained a few other findings. For example, parliaments and chambers were asked if they have a gender policy, to which 21 out of 37 replied that they did not. And similarly, parliaments and chambers were asked if they carried out a gender audit, to which the vast majority replied no. And I would also finally mention that those parliaments and chambers who had carried out an audit or did have a gender policy also supplied some supplementary information about the content of those that you can find in the report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chauvel.
Colleagues, you can already request the floor by pressing the button with an eye on it. You should see a small V appear. This means that your name has been registered, and we'll be able to give you the floor when we have the exchange of views. When we give you the floor, you should turn on your microphone and stand up. Your microphone will start working as soon as the red light is on. I'm particularly happy now to be able to present to you the key speakers for this session. The first speaker, whom I have the honour to present to you, is Ms. Marie-Colline Leroy. Madame Leroy is currently the Secretary of State for Equality of Opportunities, Gender Equality and Diversity within the Belgian federal government. Ms. Leroy, who graduated in Romance languages and as a teacher, has throughout her political career worked as a member of the Party of the Greens, Ecolo, on matters relating to employment, pensions and the statute for artists and self-employed workers. She's also paid particular attention to matters relating to education, gender and equality. As chair of the Committee of Social Affairs, Employment and Pensions in the Chamber of Representatives in Belgium, she has shown commitment to fairer social security. As Secretary of State, Marie-Colline Leroy intends to continue the fight against violence against women and on gender minorities. She works actively to create a more inclusive and fairer environment for everybody, and is committed to fostering equality of opportunities, fighting discrimination, and promoting gender equality in Belgium. Secretary of State, you have 10 minutes for your presentation. Please come here and speak at the front. Thank you.
Chers ministres, chers collègues, distingués représentants et représentants.
Dear ministers, colleagues, representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to see so many of you here today. I'd especially like to thank Ms. Eliane Tillieu, who's Speaker of the Chamber of Representatives, and Senator Gaëtan van Goitsenhoven for inviting me to speak on gender policy and representation of women and men in parliaments. We're approaching a pivotal moment on the eve of future Belgian and European elections. Right now, in Belgian and European parliaments, women only make up 40% of the elected, which leads to a fundamental question. How can we continue to strengthen the role of women in politics? To do this, it's probably useful to look at the obstacles women face before they have access to leadership positions, so that they are able afterwards to propose fair, long-term and useful solutions. We notice that women continue to face obstacles in career progression. This is the case in the professional world in general. Women make up 60% of graduates, but they only make up 20% of the top management of companies. There are many reasons for this, and we know them. Perhaps some of you have lived them, actually. Stereotypes starting from professional training, during recruitment, unequal split of household duties, which leads more women than men to work part-time and to receive lower salaries. This is why we still have this so-called glass ceiling or sticky floor, which means that women are stuck in lower positions than men from the beginning of their career. This means that access to leadership positions is a greater challenge for women. There are other discriminatory criteria, for example, people who are women but might also have a disability or who are from a migrant background. So what are the specific difficulties facing women in the political context? Women suffer 3 times more violence in the political sphere than men, according to the European Commission. This can happen online, in person, in the day-to-day, in formal exchanges or informal ones. And worse things can happen as well, but the result is the same. This creates an environment which is hostile to women advancing in their career in politics. How can we try to remedy this structural inequality? Well, we can dream of society naturally advancing towards parity and equality. So we need to bear in mind history and political history to remember that parity has been a real fight in Belgium, Belgian politics, starting with 1994, where the lists for the elections needed to have at least 2/3 of the members of the same sex. This created a system of quotas, which turned out to be the most practical way of creating a balance between men and women in the Belgian political world, and to fight conservative patriarchal norms. There are still also people who women need to feminize themselves when they appear in the media. I don't think it's going to be shocking when I bring up a parity government, which used to exist, but that's no longer the case in the Kern, which is the inner cabinet of the Prime Minister. There are also few regulatory levers to act against people who are acting abusively. and online they're becoming increasingly violent. I'm thinking about the open letter which was published in November 2022 in Le Soir Standout, which was signed by 120 elected representatives and political staff. It suggested female representatives have access to spaces where they can be listened to and have access to spaces of well-being. There's no killing blow, but there are ways to improve the situation. But there are also ways of integrating women in politics that need to be rolled out on a societal level. For example, it's important to raise awareness among young people. I'm convinced that deconstruction of gender stereotypes can begin from a very early age to raise awareness among the generations of tomorrow, to open their eyes, their points of view, to stop women being boxed in to certain careers, and to do away with masculinity being a synonym of competence and leadership. Federally, we're working to integrate this through the gender mainstreaming plan, which contains 180 measures which seek to reduce or eliminate inequality between men and women. Structural policy is what is needed. And it's also by standing together and creating alliances at every level of power to make this matter of equality more important. As Belgium is currently leading the EU Council Presidency, we're also working on European level. We're working with Hungary and Spain as a trio to promote the transformative approach to equality. And we actually signed a declaration on the 26th and 27th of February. Belgium wants to stimulate the creation of a gender agenda to create more equality even in an institutional framework. This way, violence, fighting against gender-based violence has become a very important topic, as well as reducing the gender wage gap and including women in decision-making. This diplomatic work will continue in a formal council dedicated to gender next May. About cyber violence, which I brought up before, I welcome the AI directive, which is proposed by the EU and which seeks to regulate online violence in the same way that it regulates offline violence. This way it integrates a gender perspective to deal with matters of hatred and violence against women online. To conclude, I'd like to come back to the question of why. Why do we need to reinforce and ensure the place of women in politics? And why is this still a question in 2024? It seems paradoxical to consider decision-making which will impact all of the population if you're ignoring 50% of them. I'm convinced that diversity and representation, as well as female leadership, are sources of progress for society as a whole. To draw as proof, I'd like to quote a study by Graydon Enterprises, which shows that staff in companies with gender parity have a much lower risk of burnout, and that there is a lot of that you can see that resilience in companies is correlated to gender equality. So we can be inspired by this information to say that women are real added value. Our responsibility globally is to keep guaranteeing to women the right to live their full skill and ability. And that's the condition for true equality, which is the source and the way in which progress can work in society. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Leroy.
Thank Thank you, Ms. Leroy. Now I suggest we listen to Ms. Latifa Gahouchi, a Belgian senator, head of the Committee on Gender Equality in the Belgian Senate. Ms. Gahouchi, socialist, who is head of the, who has been chosen by the French-speaking community. She has been an activist since a very young age. She has a degree in intercultural mediation. She used to be in the Wallonian Parliament, and she has put forward a lot of resolutions which touch on matters of rights, protection, and well-being of women, but also on matters of sexual violence against women. She wants to ensure more representation of women and girls in studies and in jobs related to STEM, and also with matters related to abortion. She has also invested a lot of work into energy poverty and its relation to gender, fight against monetary violence in couples, and more recently in a resolution seeking to create a resolution around menopause. She has a lot of conviction. She fights for what she believes in, and she does so unfailingly. She wants the citizens' voices to be heard. So, Madam Senator Latifa, you have 10 minutes to speak, and I invite you to go up to the stage. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour for me to take part today in this round table on gender policy and the representation of women and men in our parliaments. I sincerely thank the organisers of the COSAC plenary meeting for giving me the opportunity to speak in my capacity as a member of the Belgian Regional Parliament, but also, and above all, as the chair of the Belgian Senate's Advisory Committee on Equal Opportunities for Men and Women. The issue of gender policy and the balanced representation of women and men in parliaments is fundamental to a truly inclusive and representative democracy. I would therefore like to take this opportunity today to share with you some thoughts on the challenges that women parliamentarians face on a daily basis, to take stock of the measures put in place in Belgium to move towards equal representation in political institutions, to briefly mention the situation in Europe and around the world, and to address the issue of female leadership. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which celebrated its 75th anniversary last year, unambiguously proclaims the principle of equality between men and women. Yet, in many parliaments around the world, this equality remains an objective to be achieved rather than a tangible and effective reality. The challenges facing women parliamentarians are many and complex. Firstly, there are the persistent cultural and social obstacles both within political parties and in society at large. Gender stereotypes and social expectations very often limit women's opportunities to enter politics and progress in their parliamentary careers. Finally, women often have to juggle family and professional responsibilities to a greater extent than men, which can unfortunately act as a brake upon their political activity. To refer to my own country for a moment, Belgium can be considered a pioneer in terms of its institutions for fighting for gender equality. We have a large number of women MPs and ministers at all levels of government in the regions and communities, as well as at federal level. Recently, Belgium reached a number of historic milestones I'm thinking particularly of a First Woman Prime Minister from 2019 to 2020, a federal government with full gender equality since October 2020. For the first time, 2 women as presiding officers of the House, Eliane Tillier and Madame Dawes in the Senate. In the House, it is the first time a woman has occupied the perch of the Speaker in the chamber. I think we can continue to celebrate all this whilst also keeping an eye on what we believe the future enhanced role of women can be in Belgian political life and in society in general. As far as equal representation is concerned, Belgium has adopted 3 pieces of legislation to ensure the equal presence of men and women on lists for legislative, European and regional elections. Those 3 laws were adopted in 2002. 17th June 2002, ensuring the equal presence of women and men on candidate lists for elections to the European Parliament. Equal representation of men and women on candidate lists for elections to the federal legislative chambers and the Council of the German-speaking community. And a special law ensuring the equal presence of men and women on candidate lists for elections to the Walloon Regional Council, the Flemish Council, and the Council of the Brussels Capital Region. Quotas are also an important tool for promoting the participation of women in politics. In Belgium, some regions have adopted mandatory quotas for local elections, which has helped to increase the presence of women on municipal and provincial councils. In Wallonia, the decree on diverse representation now requires at least 1/3 of local councillors to be either women or men. At the last local elections in 2018, just over 38% of local councillors in Wallonia were women. So there's still a lot of work to be done. We'll see where this percentage stands the day after the local elections in October 2024, won't we? Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of gender equality in politics, I would also like to discuss with you some key data from the IPU's 2022 report, Women in Parliament in 2022. By the end of 2022, only less than 1/3 of lower or single houses had the percentage of seats won by women reached or exceeded 30%. In 64 countries, women held at least 30% of the seats in the lower or single house at the end of that same year. On a global scale, the average proportion of women as presiding officers of parliaments had reached 22.7%. However, this figure was lower than the overall percentage of women parliamentarians. I think it is also important to recognise that the representation of women in politics is not just a question of numbers or quotas. It is also about promoting genuine equality of opportunity and ensuring that women's voices and concerns are heard and taken into account in the decision-making process. This requires not only greater participation by women in political bodies, but also a more profound cultural change to eliminate gender bias and systemic discrimination. Women parliamentarians face a unique set of challenges in exercising their mandate. I mentioned this in the introduction to my speech. Women often have to face sexist behaviour and prejudice from their male colleagues, which can make their work more difficult and less rewarding. What's more, women are often underrepresented in leadership positions, both in parliaments and in political party bodies, which in turn then limits their ability to influence decisions and shape the political agenda. It is therefore imperative that we put in place concrete measures to support and promote the participation of women in politics. This means raising awareness of gender issues, training candidates and elected representatives in equality issues, and creating an inclusive and respectful working environment. We must also encourage political parties to adopt recruitment and promotion policies which promote diversity and gender equality, because female leadership brings unique perspectives, particular skills and different leadership styles that enrich and strengthen collective decision making. Our presence in positions of power and influence helps to better reflect the diversity and plurality of our societies, but it also contributes to the creation of more inclusive and equitable policies. Women leaders are often recognised for their ability to work in teams, build alliances, and find solutions that take into account the interests and needs of all. Their inclusive approach to leadership encourages the participation of all members of society and strengthens the legitimacy of the decisions taken. Women's leadership is also synonymous with resilience and perseverance in the face of adversity. Women leaders often face greater challenges and obstacles because of the gender prejudice and discrimination they encounter. Despite this, many women leaders have shown exceptional determination to overcome these obstacles and make significant progress in their respective fields. Furthermore, female leadership is essential to inspire and motivate future generations of women and girls. By seeing women in leadership positions, excelling in various fields, young women are encouraged to pursue their dreams and believe in their abilities. Female leadership, therefore, plays a crucial role in promoting gender equality and combating gender stereotypes. In addition, female leadership is associated with positive economic and social outcomes. Many studies have shown that companies and organisations run by women often achieve better financial performance, greater innovation, and better risk management. Similarly, countries with a greater number of women leaders tend to achieve better results in terms of health, education, and well-being. Women's leadership is therefore a transformative force that contributes to building a fairer, more egalitarian, and more prosperous world for all. By valuing and supporting women's leadership, we strengthen democracy, promote economic and social progress, and work together to achieve gender equality in all spheres of life. But it is only by working together as women and men that we can achieve gender equality. Male parliamentarians can make a significant contribution as allies in the cause of gender equality in politics. Their voice and influence can be decisive in advancing the reforms needed to promote equal opportunities and eliminate gender-based discrimination. By supporting initiatives aimed at increasing women's representation in politics and removing obstacles to their participation, male parliamentarians can make a significant contribution to achieving gender equality in our democratic institutions. In addition, male parliamentarians can play a crucial role as role models and mentors for their male colleagues by setting an example and promoting a culture of respect and equality within their political parties and institutions. They can help to change attitudes and raise awareness of gender issues among their peers. By encouraging women's participation in politics and supporting their leadership, male MPs can help create a more diverse and inclusive political environment for all. Finally, male MPs can play a leading role in combating gender stereotypes and prejudices, which are unfortunately still common in our societies, by challenging gender norms and sexist attitudes, promoting inclusive policies and practices, and defending women's rights at all levels. Male parliamentarians can help build a fairer and more equal future for all. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the fight for gender equality in politics does not just concern women, but concerns, rather, society as a whole. It is by working together as women and men, parliamentarians, that we will be able to overcome the obstacles that still stand in the way of equality and build a future where everyone, whatever their gender, has the same opportunities to participate in political life and thus help shape the future of our society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci, Madame Gauchi.
Thank you, Ms. Gauchi. Now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Agnes Hubert, who's a founding member of Gender 5+ and professor at the College of Europe. She has a diploma in economy and political science at the University of Paris 1. She began her career in journalism before she started working at the European Commission, where she worked, among other topics, on social affairs, the third world, and employment, as well as gender equality. And she was head of unit in charge of equality of opportunity between women and men for 2 years, as also attaché with the Commission of the Committee on Women's Rights. As head of the feminist group Gender 5+, she is an associate member at Political Science Paris. She is also in the Equality Council between men and women in the French Republic. She's also the author of several books and articles, as well as having made contributions to academic work in the field of gender. You have 10 minutes, Madam Professor, to speak, and please come up to the stage.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la Secrétaire d'État, Madame la Sénatrice.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Secretary of State, Senator, Members of Parliament. I'd like to start by thanking the Belgian Presidency for putting this issue on the agenda for today's meeting. It's especially important given that we're coming up to the European elections and there's a volatile context, which means we must think about our democratic governance. The European Union's origin and identity are in democracy, and therefore we should set an example. And representation of half of its population in political bodies is therefore particularly key. It's with a certain degree of emotion that I'm speaking to you here today, because I can't help but think of the very first meeting of the Women's Rights Committees, which wasn't yet part of COSAC, and it was held here in Brussels in the Federal Parliament in 1994. It was organised by Sabine de Bethune, who would later become the Speaker of the Senate, and who at that time led the European Experts Network and helped the Commission with decision making. This is in 1994, and the percentage of female MEPs had just increased from 19 to 27% in the June 1994 European elections. And this increase was down to several factors. First of all, efforts made by female politicians, in particular Simone Veil, who was the first president of the European Parliament, first female president of the European Parliament. They met in Athens for European Women's Summit, and they denounced unanimously the democratic deficit caused by the underrepresentation of women in politics. This was 30 years ago. The second factor was a campaign which quite playfully called on the inclusion of women to vote for female politicians. And for example, this included slogans like, "Is it normal that 80% of the parliament shave every morning?" Or, "Can you imagine a world where 81% people are Romeos and 19% are Juliets?" The third factor was a new concept of what's called parity democracy, democracy based on equality. And this was about not stopping at representation in name only, or descriptive representation, adding women without any impact, but instead rethinking procedures and policies based on full equality in parliaments and other bodies. And this was to promote what was called substantive representation. And the final argument was in the 1990s, the EU's agenda saw equality policies extended to positions of power. It became clear that the aim of wage equality enshrined in the Rome Treaty would not be achieved without looking more broadly at the status of women in society and their lack of representation in decision-making posts. 3 decades later, Europe is considered the most egalitarian continent in the world. And this is the fact that this is enshrined in the treaties, but also there are many directives on equal treatment, on equal wages, against violence, on a work-life balance. There's significant case law as well, financial resources, strategies, programs, and institutions dedicated to the issue. These include the IGA as well. One representative of that will be speaking after me. There's also the committee from the European Parliament, which is usually called the FAM Committee. This is the Committee for Women's Rights and Gender Equality. We've also seen a civil society which has been more united, so a European Women's Lobby. And these policies are for 27 member states, and Europe has some of the highest levels of political representation in the world. And over the past 5 years, the Union of Equality has been bolstered under the impetus of the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and her college with full gender parity, her Commissioner for Equality, as well as the almost equal percentage of European MEPs, female MEPs, 39.1%, and also the dynamic FAM Committee as well within the European Parliament. That's also been important. It's no coincidence that the European Equality Index, which is regularly calculated by the IGA in Vilnius, exceeded 70 points out of 100 in 2023. So we're not at the end, but we are making progress. And if we look at things more closely, there is lots of good news. For example, as outlined in the 41st biennial report, thank you, sir, for presenting it, women's representation in national parliaments is only 32% for 52% of the population. There are significant national disparities because the representation goes from 14% in some parliaments to 46% in the most progressive parliaments. These disparities are more blatant within the executive bodies of Parliament and under chairmanships in parliaments. These same disparities also exist in senior posts in Parliament's administration, where the percentage of women in management roles is between 20 and 87%. In the European Parliament, the gender gap has decreased progressively because certain political parties and certain governments have adopted quotas and gender-based lists, and we've almost reached parity. I mentioned 39.1%. This is the figure after the UK left the EU, because after the last European elections, the figure was actually 41%. 41% women in the European Parliament. Of the 23 parliamentary committees, only 7 are chaired by women, and only one political group of the 7 political groups in the European Parliament is led by a woman, and 2 are co-chaired by men and women. So, in conclusion, over the past few years, we've seen descriptive representation go up in Parliament, but positions of power which would allow substantial changes to be made are still in the hands of men. The idea that new female players on the political scene could help update democracy is not new. It's not a new one. And it's at the heart of this concept of parity democracy that I mentioned before. The women in power who met in Athens in 1992 insisted in their declaration on 4 principles that I'd like to remind you of in order to explain the need to plug the democratic deficit represented by the lack of women in positions of power. First of all, the fundamental right to equality. That is, women represent half of the population. Equality means parity is necessary in representation and in the governance of nations. The second principle is a utilitarian principle. The underrepresentation of women underutilizes half of the talent and skills that exist in a society. There's also the principle arguing for their presence. That is, interests and needs of women and minorities are not taken into account properly if they are absent from positions of power. And fourthly, balanced representation in elected assemblies can generate ideas, values, and behaviour which may lead to a fairer world for everybody. So we need to make this a golden rule for our parliaments. The idea of parity democracy was able to win over the European political agenda at a time when progress on wage equality had reached an impasse and where affirmative action, including quotas, was being called into question. And a broader approach, an innovative approach, started to become attractive. In the political arena, this allowed a shift from a quantitative approach and quotas to a more qualitative approach linked to the very nature of democracy in order to mobilize voters, because in the studies on the last European elections, more women voted, and they voted in particular for women. Iliane Vogel-Polsky was a Belgian lawyer who dedicated her life to equality in the European Union. And she said that the parity democracy is as follows. If equal representation is acknowledged as a prerequisite for democracy, the rules of the game and social norms have to change. This could radically transform society and allow for truly egalitarian relations between men and women. More recently, Ruth Rubio Marin, who's a professor of law at the University of Seville, wrote that Europe is moving away from a narrow framework of equality based on equality of rights and opportunities, and is embracing gradually a model of equality based on parity democracy. This model expands the objective of recognizing rights and includes putting men and women in a position where they can participate equally in all areas of life. Has this call to update democracy been heard? Many initiatives have been taken at European and national level to increase the proportion of women in politics, and this has been happening for a long time. There's, for example, women's networks, there's been studies, conferences, strategies, guides, many ministerial meetings, charters, recommendations from the Council, and even in some member states, constitutions have been revised. The Commission has focused on equality many times in its strategies. In the 2020-2024 strategy, it's proposed that member states who request it will receive funding and expertise in order to ensure equal representation. The Commission also sets an example with an objective of 50% women in senior posts, and that has almost been achieved. And finally, what you treasure, you measure. The database on women in decision-making roles managed by the IGA in Vilnius and the European Index on Equality are essential monitoring tools if we want to measure progress inequality in the EU. So the right to gender equality is enshrined in the treaties and in law derived from it as a value in the European Union. And gender parity in politics has seen progress in EU parliaments, but there's a long way to go in order to remove obstacles to women's full participation and to achieve the ideal of parity democracy, which revitalizes democracy and remobilizes citizens. Gender policies, however, are at the same time the Achilles heel, but they also spearhead our democracies. Anti-gender discourse, led by extremist social, political, men's rights and religious movements, are being spread, or is being spread on social media, and it's winning over public opinion, and it's justifying attacks on female politicians and social media. For swathes of the population, discontent, intolerance, and paradoxically, social and economic inequality are merging to make what was politically incorrect a few years ago acceptable, and sexism is particularly commonplace. In the face of this situation, rather than pursuing a policy of deadly one-upmanship, governments and democratic parties must remain steadfast in insisting on Europe's values. The ideal of a parity democracy, by strengthening equality, both would update democracy within parliaments, whilst also standing up to those who want to do away with it. As shown in recent studies on gender, in parliaments in general and at the European Parliament especially, underrepresentation of women in positions of power is not because of their lack of political ambition, but because of structural and societal obstacles which continue to dissuade them from standing in elections, from carrying out their mandates, or from having access to positions of power once they are elected. And these obstacles multiply with age, social class, ethnic origin, religion, disability, and sexual orientation. And there's a very low representation in the European Union of these categories. It's clear that these barriers vary depending on the cultural, economic and political context, as well as the electoral system in place, and that they're not the same in all countries and parliaments. However, there are three key categories of obstacles that I would like to mention that can be seen in all systems. First of all, we have the obstacles which stop women from entering politics. Difficulty in accessing key resources such as time, money and political networks. Unequal division of family responsibilities, a culture of male domination in parliaments, stereotypical behaviour and violence. A study carried out by the IPU in 2019 showed that there was an alarming level of sexism, harassment and violence against female parliamentarians in Europe, especially those under the age of 40. Secondly, there are obstacles which limit the demand for female candidates because of how political parties recruit and select candidates. And thirdly, the electoral system. It's been proven that proportional representation is better in terms of female candidates being selected than first past the post systems. Now, given we have all these obstacles, all studies suggest that an approach combining hard and soft measures, from modifying the electoral system to fighting sexual harassment and cyber harassment in political life, are important. There are some particularly political obstacles, however. For example, there's a lack of political will in parties to take measures to promote a balance between the sexes and the presence of women in decision-making processes. For example, a study ordered by the FAM Committee in the European Parliament in 2019 recommended that political parties adopt quotas or equivalent measures as the only way of ensuring parity among candidates. Only the Greens and the European Left, together with the European Socialists, included these requests for sex balance or gender balance in their statutes.
Je vous demandais de penser tout doucement à clôturer. Vous êtes déjà au-delà du double.
Could you please end your speech as you're almost double your speaking time?
Donc, la volonté politique fait...
So, there's been a failure of political will, for example, because of a lack of legally binding measures. In 2015, then once again in 2022, the European Parliament called for a revision of the EU's electoral law, including the introduction of limited new rules for gender quotas on electoral lists. This proposal was rejected twice by the Council. The second key obstacle, and this is the last one, is a direct and ideological opposition to gender equality in politics. Recent studies have shown an increase in direct opposition and indirect opposition to gender equality. So-called gender ideology and the rights of the LGBTIQ plus population within the Council and the European Parliament following the rise in populism on the right. I'm very sorry for taking so long. There's no doubt that feminist activism in the EU has a considerable impact by linking the absence of women in decision-making processes to a democratic deficit. We need feminist activism, but incorporating both men and women who get involved, because it's becoming clearer and clearer that men and women need to be able to deal with this issue of equality. The threats to democracy represented by populist and anti-gender movements have paradoxically boosted the importance of democratic values and the strategic advantages of promoting gender equality. However, we don't know whether our leaders in the EU are ready to change the rules of the game and social norms as suggested by Ilian Rogel-Polski to save our democracies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madame Hubert. I would urge speakers to stick to their allotted time. The final keynote speaker of this session will be Ms. Marusha Gortner. Ms. Gortner is responsible for the management, strategic planning and implementation of the work of the European Institute for Gender Equality, the EIGE, in the fields of research and data collection, gender mainstreaming and gender-based violence. Before joining EIGE, she worked for many years in the field of gender equality in the Slovenian government, where she headed the Equal Opportunities Division of the Ministry of Labour, Family, Social Affairs and Equal Opportunities. A graduate of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Ljubljana, she holds a master's degree in gender studies from Central European University. As an expert, she was involved in the management of projects and the development and implementation of gender equality policies, including gender mainstreaming and cooperation with EU institutions and international organisations. Ms. Gortner, you have 10 minutes to speak, and could I please ask you to stick to that so that we have time for a debate? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. I will now turn to English. Honorable President, my honorable panelists and members of the parliaments, it's a great pleasure to be here today, and I would especially like to thank the Belgian presidency of the Council of the European Union for their commitment to have gender equality high on their presidency agenda, and as well as for today's discussion and also concrete proposal for a declaration for gender-sensitive parliaments. I represent the European Institute for Gender Equality. This is the only European Union agency mandated to work on the topics of gender equality. So we provide data, research, evidence. We also develop tools and methods for gender mainstreaming. And today I will speak about two of our key activities which very closely relate to the topic we are discussing today. So this is political decision making. So our agency collects data through gender statistics database. We regularly monitor the situation when it comes to the decision making in the European Union as well as beyond. So we collect data for 37 countries, 27 EU member states, also countries of the European Economic Area, as well as candidate and pre-accession countries. we collect data when it comes to political decision-making on representation of women and men in the parliament, governments, public administration, as well as political parties. And as I said, we also develop certain tools, step-by-step toolkits, and I will speak today about the most recent tool. It's a tool on gender-sensitive parliaments and action plans. So this is the focus of today's presentation, and I have a few slides to share. So the parliaments. Parliaments as the bastions of democracy and gatekeepers of gender equality should be representative also of their constituencies. So men and women in all their diverse life situations. But are they? We have heard today quite some data already coming from different research, one of this particular forum as well. However, we can say that the European Parliament is gender balanced. So we know that our latest data shows that 40% of women and 60% of men represent the European Parliament. So this is what we call balanced representation, but it's not parity yet. So the upcoming 2024 European elections, they represent a crucial opportunity for achieving balanced, so parity representation in the European Parliament. And this challenge needs to be met basically at the national level because we do not have any European level legislation on gender quotas, so it is a responsibility of each member state. What about the national parliaments in the EU? There we are lagging behind. We have heard that if only 1 in 3 members of the parliament is a woman. So we know that 67% of EU members of the parliament, of the national parliaments, are men. And this confirms the findings we have already heard from the biannual report today. And over the last 20 years, the share of women members of the parliament has improved. There is an average improvement of 0.6 percentage points per year. And what does it mean? That at this rate of change, it will take next 11 years to achieve gender balance, so 40-60, and another 28 years to achieve gender parity. And the first step to get more women elected is to have more women candidates. Our data shows no progress since 2019. So women still account for 34% of candidates for the most recent elections across 20 EU member states for which we have available data. The political parties, they control selection of candidates, and those political parties in most of the member states are mainly led by men. Across the EU, nearly 3/4 of party leaders are men. And our evidence is quite clear. Gender balance amongst members of the European Parliament and national members of the Parliament is higher in countries where we have legislative quotas compared to those countries without legislative quotas. It is also clear that to be effective, the numerical quota needs to be accompanied by meaningful sanctions in case of non-compliance, and also with appropriate placement rules when it comes to candidate lists, so that it ensures equal visibility of both genders. There is also evidence that there is imbalanced representation by age, highlighted by the low numbers of young women and men in the parliament, And indeed, we are facing a lack of comparable, EU comparable data, which would be broken down by sex, and also other variables which would allow us to measure political participation and representation of different groups of women and men, including from those most disadvantaged groups. Maybe just an interesting comparison. So when we look at the countries with no quota, it will take as long as twice to achieve gender-balanced representation in national parliaments compared to countries with quotas. So in the countries with quotas, we can expect that we will have gender balance by 2031, and in those countries without quotas, only in 2039. And it's not just representation that matters. Women that do get elected are also often underrepresented in the positions of influence. So there is a persistent both vertical and horizontal segregation in parliamentary committees. So vertical meaning that women are less likely to chair the committees, and horizontal is that women are concentrated in specific committees, usually not those committees with power to decide on the, let's say, economic advancement, on budgets, on defense matters, security matters, and so on. And within national parliaments, the share of women members of the parliament, leaders of parliamentary committees, actually fell to 29% in 2023 from 32% in 2019. So we are even noticing the trend, the opposite trend. Our analysis on how gender sensitive are parliaments in the member states and the European Parliament show that there is definitely room for improvement. And I will just speak about a few areas where there is clear room for improvement based on our data. So working conditions of the members of the parliament are often not family friendly. For example, provisions to promote work-life balance for members of the parliament are lacking in many parliaments, partly also because of the special status of the members of the parliament as elected officials. And our data shows that there are 11 member states which members of the parliament are explicitly entitled to take maternity leave, and 9 of those also which make provisions for paternity leave. So it's a very small number of parliaments, less than a half. Gender-based violence, it has been mentioned today that this is a big issue, both when it comes to online as well as offline world. Sex-based discrimination, sexual harassment in the parliaments, this requires an urgent attention. Widespread online, offline sexism and violence against women in parliaments, these include hate speech, harassment, is a major barrier when it comes to women's equal participation. And it goes for all stages: to run for elections, to hold positions of power, to take political decisions, to be politically active, and to voice their opinions. And many members of the parliament, women members of the parliament, have their own stories which they are willing to share and raise awareness on these problems. Yet our study identified only 4 member states in which at least one chamber of the parliament has a specific policy outlawing discrimination on the basis of sex or gender, or a policy outlawing sexual harassment. So this is definitely an area to improve in the parliaments. What else? Most national parliaments are still to introduce gender mainstreaming into their practices and outputs. 23 national parliaments have gender equality body, either as a formal, such as Gender Equality Committee, and we have some representatives today here as well, or informal bodies such as women's caucuses. And 7 of these bodies have full legislative capacity as well. 4 national parliaments do not have any type of gender equality body in their structures. When we talk about gender action plans, only 5 national parliaments have gender equality action plan, and less than a third have binding rules that require gender impact assessment or gender analysis of draft legislation. And 7 member states have parliaments that do apply some type of gender budgeting in the process of setting the national budget, and 3 of these have even specific body tasked with this work. And parliaments also need to do a little bit more to ensure that there are physical spaces adequately equipped to meet the needs of diverse groups of women and men, staff, visitors, including those with families, and also to communicate about gender equality better. What our data shows is that 12 national parliaments reported having childcare facilities, but less than a half held at least one event on gender equality and women's rights from May 22 to May 23, so in 1 year. But today's event is a good example how that can be done. What can parliaments do? So I will now speak about a very concrete tool which any parliament can undertake, be it European Parliament, national parliament, regional parliament. It's a self-assessment online tool on gender-sensitive parliaments. This assessment provides a snapshot at the level of gender sensitivity of the parliaments and also highlights the areas of improvement. But it's not enough. We need institutional change, and this is only a starting point. This self-assessment is a starting point. And next step is to reflect on the findings of the assessment, take action, develop measures which would address the identified gender inequalities within the parliament. And this is our next tool, which we have developed. This is a tool on gender equality action plans for the parliaments. And this tool provides a step-by-step guidance for different levels on how to develop, implement, monitor, and evaluate gender equality action plan. So, to conclude, I would invite you as members of the Parliament to explore our tools, both our data in the first place, then the tools on self-assessment, on gender-sensitive parliaments, and then take action to prepare an action plan with different steps, starting with the establishment of a structure which would be responsible for the implementation of such action plan. And just to very, very final words, as it's been said already before, we can't have full democracy when women and men in their diverse situations can't make decisions. They need to have the opportunity, equal opportunities to make and take decisions about developments of our society, that their different diverse situations are taken into account, their needs are respected, and that nobody is left behind. And we can only do it together. So thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for those very enlightening contributions on these topics. Now I would like to start the debate. We're going to shift things around a little bit, shake things up with a ping-pong formula. One parliamentarian, one response from a keynote speaker as appropriate. Given the limited time, I shall ask you just to jump in if you feel that it's a particularly specific topic for you. I shan't ask you all systematically. 1.5 minutes for contributions, for questions. Just 45 seconds for the answers, though. One speech, one answer, maximum. Do we have a first speaker? I can't see you on the screen yet.
Voilà. Nous commençons avec les...
We're starting with Spain. Pere Pons.
Buenas tardes y muchas.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Eliane. I hope the ping-pong system works. I wanted to shake things up a bit. Listening to all four of you, we've heard a lot of positives, but I was commenting here with my neighbours about the negative rhetoric which seems to be tightening its grip. We're going backwards. The rights obtained by feminists are now in danger, and the European elections will be a real test for those rights and for those policies. A lot of teenage boys think they're discriminated against as compared to teenage girls. There's pornography involving children and young people, which is also part of this situation of inequality. So what can we do about these steps backward? What can we do about this rhetoric? We're seeing this with the far right in Spain. It's gone beyond words now. They're cutting budgets for equality policy. They're cutting representatives for equality in regional governments. If you don't have a policy, if you don't have a budget, wither your rights. And it'll hit women first. If you have a committee for equality, a ministry for equality, a budget for equality in your parliaments, and that's taken away, then your equality policy disappears too.
40-45.
So 40-45 seconds for a response? Okay, I'll try to keep an eye on the clock. Thank you very much for that very interesting question from Spain. We're in the same presidency trio, and we talked a lot about picking up on what Spain and the previous presidency had done. I think you've raised two very important issues there. Firstly, we need to ensure that policies are anchored into institutions. That's one of the things we wanted to do in the trio. We wanted a commissioner for equality. We want one in the next mandate too. We want all of these policies to come together into our institutional framework. Then you can see it, because otherwise it won't be so visible for people's everyday lives, so despite the huge consequences which that have. And then for young people, for the future, the culture of consent, that's going to be a crucial issue. That's going to be a priority for all. Thank you very much. Marc Angel is our second speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The last 5 years, the European Parliament has been really trying to support the Commission in deepening the Union of Equality. It was not easy because the Council was always difficult to convince, because the words gender and intersectional discrimination tend to disappear from Council language. But we won, and we used gender-inclusive language, not gender-neutral language, because the concept of men and women has evolved in the last 70 years, and we used also EU case law to see that when we talk about men and women, it's men and women in all their diversity, so we have to be very inclusive. My question is, why is it, if you defend women's rights, if you defend LGBTIQ rights, why are you portrayed as an ideologist by certain political forces? I do think there is no feminist agenda, there is no LGBTI agenda, there is only a human rights agenda, because women's rights and LGBTI rights are human rights. So how can we counter this anti-gender movement, who they are the ideologists because they are defending patriarchy, they are ultra-religious or ultra-conservative religious extremists? How can we better organize to counter this financially well-organized anti-gender movement financed by the Kremlin, financed by the American evangelicals and by many other sources from Europe too? What must we do to become better and to just say this is just a human rights agenda and there is no gender ideology? Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Une réponse, Madame.
Thank you. Madame Hubert for a response.
To sort of try and answer your question, I mean, there are sort of, at the moment, sort of 3 big research projects which are specifically looking at strategies not only to sort of analyze what's going on and what's the state of the art in terms of anti-gender policies, but as well how to answer these anti-gender policies. And one way or the other, it will certainly take the resolution of governments and parliaments to actually engage against these anti-gender policies. We cannot only sort of leave it to civil society organizations.
Thank you so much. Mr. Milagros Marcos Ortega. Oh, Madame. Mrs.
Sí. Sí, efectivamente. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Women's participation in Spain is considerable. Before the equality law, the People's Party, which I belong to, had a president in Congress and Senate too. And in the last parliamentary elections, we saw that we were at over 40%. Now, it's not enough, but it is progress. There are many measures which can still be taken. One is not to take any steps backwards. We've seen laws such as only yes means yes, which was well intentioned, but it means rapists are being released early from prison, and young people see these step backwards in terms of what the concept is of equality. Young people in university, for instance, are facing this, and we're very concerned about what these changes could mean. There are measures which need to be taken. We've heard some of these already. Quotas is a complex. Introducing quotas is a complex and controversial issue. You need some kind of intensive policy before that where you can get some progress, where politicians have been involved and achieved decisive results. Otherwise it tends not to have much of a result. I think conciliation can also be reconciling work and family life can also be very important, and so that women aren't only doing soft jobs or whatever, but also we see mentoring for other professional fields too. There are also concerns about equality between women and men in parliaments, which is linked to another concern in Spain, which is all citizens being equal in the eyes of the law and in all the territories. And the amnesty bill, which the government of Spain is putting forward, endangers that.
Do you give an answer? Yes, Mr. Gardner.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Very, very important comment, actually, that quotas are not enough. Yes, we have to have supportive measures when it comes to work-life balance. We know that being a politician, sometimes it takes full days and full weeks. That's why some of the parliaments have introduced certain concrete steps. I mentioned, for example, care services, but that's not enough. Of course, the whole the societal expectations, the societal changes of stereotypes, values when it comes to politics as such, and then especially when it comes to women in politics. Maybe just a short quote. You mentioned that quotas may be controversial and a complex measure. 2 weeks ago, the UN Commission on the Status of Women took place, and there were debates also around the political participation. And in one of the side events, a Slovenian state secretary responsible for gender equality, I have to say, a young man said, there is no need to be afraid of quota. There will always be enough competent women to fill in the positions. So,
thank you, Mrs. Christine Schwarz-Fuchs.
Address the current state of gender representation in Austria. While there have been strides forward, there has also been a recent setback for women in Austria. I'd like to point out that on national level we are quite good when it comes to representation of women in politics. For example, in the Federal Council, where I am a representative of, we have got 46.7% women, which is a very high number. However, when it comes to regional parliaments, the number is quite low. Only about 35% of women occupy seats in the regional parliaments in Austria. And when it comes to mayors, we've got 219 mayors in Austria, and only about 10% of them are women, which is a very low number. And the declining interest among young women in politics makes the situation even worse when we look into the future. Many lack awareness of political pathways. Therefore, I think we must provide concrete opportunities and foster inclusive environments. While Austria lacks legally mandated gender quotas, some parties commit to including a minimum percentage of women in candidate lists. However, more action is needed. To ensure equal access to political office, we must enhance education, strengthen also party commitments to gender diversity, and cultivate inclusive environments. Additionally, addressing cultural barriers is vital. Many still hold traditional views, and they are discouraging women from political careers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Madame Gauchy.
Ms. Gauchy?
Merci.
Thank you. Well, indeed, quotas are not the only way to achieve parity or move towards parity in parliaments or in municipal councils. In Belgium, after quotas, we have also introduced measures on electoral lists. So if a man heads the list, the second person, a candidate on the list, must be a woman. And so this is basically an alternative system where we have one man, one woman, one man, one woman. So if a woman heads the list, then it would need to start with a woman and then be followed by a man, etc. Unfortunately, there is a culture. Oh, is my speaking time up? I'm sorry, already over. Thank you. The next speaker is Maria Nicolaou from Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with you that equal participation of men and women has a direct relation with the deepening of our democracy. However, unfortunately, women's participation is not only limited in the national parliaments. Women are absent from labor organization and other mass associations of people, because if women are not there at the basis, they are not going to end up suddenly at the top. So we have the gender roles, stereotypes, and all of these things are an impediment for women to get involved into political life. So we need policies at the European level that will lift those burdens from women, and also women need to be encouraged to seek positions of power. However, we need all those thousands of women across the European Union that do not have the means to fight against sexism, against all of these things, in order to raise their voice, because either they are poor or they are afraid of the consequences. So we see that in reality we still have a long way to go when we have those unequal conditions of living, and we have these neoliberal attacks against the standard of living, especially of women. We are talking today about women, the women of the peoples of Europe. However, we are looking at the women in Palestine, and we need to talk about the women that are victims of war. My country as well has hundreds of women that were victims of the war, and we think of those women especially that are losing their lives every day, that are giving birth in the middle of the street, that see their children dying.
Thank you very much. Well, women are usually the first victims of war. I'm not sure that anybody would like to react to that. Perhaps I could do it directly. Of course, we need to promote the involvement of women wherever it's possible. For example, make diversity compulsory if we have organizations, trade unions, mutuals, for example, because we need to respect the balance in society. And for example, in Belgium, it was made compulsory for organizations that are public funded to ensure that we have men and women in the decision-making bodies on the management board. And it's also about setting an example. If you set an example, this then opens up the pathway towards improving it across society. The next speaker is Sia Tasser from Slovenia.
Yes.
Yes. Hvala za besedo.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you, Ms. Gordner. I'd like to address you particularly because you're from Slovenia. I wanted to mention stereotypes, and there's some interesting statistics from Slovenia. One study showed that in 2022, 48% of pupils agreed with the statement that men are more suitable when it comes to running a company than women. And, for example, statements saying that women should not be engaged in politics. Lots of men agreed with that. These are very worrying statistics. I think we can all agree that we need to think about gender equality, and to do so, we have a lot of work to do in education, in teaching, and in societies in general. And we political representatives also need to do our job. An amendment was tabled on Article 57 because this is about excluding women from international representation in delegations, and I think that this is regretful because it's right in international bodies to have representation of women. But whatever happens, I would like to thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I'd like to thank all of the men who took the floor on behalf of women in this debate.
Potem pa najbolje, da nadaljujemo v slovenščini.
Thank you very much. Well, perhaps I can respond in Slovenian. Yes, it's true. It's regrettable that we've seen polls illustrating the things that you've highlighted in Slovenia and other European Union countries. This is happening, and it's true that young people of our generation have, unfortunately, a more traditional view of the roles of men and women and how tasks should be divided between men and women. It's important that we look at social media, because it's really the social media which are the vectors of these kinds of stereotypes and these kinds of gender stereotypes.
Elena Murelli for the next intervention.
Presidente, colleghi.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, equal pay and reconciling work and family life are concepts that we're seeing increasing application of. But women's rights to adequate medical care and prevention and screening information is often lacking for women. Women are absent from STEM fields. We need to encourage participation in the sector. That's increasingly urgent. The Italian Parliament sees more women now, as of the last few years, and there is a system which uses a 40% quota for women or alternation of men and women. It's 33% women overall. In politics, we are achieving a lot, and having a woman leader of the country obviously helps, but it's not enough. We need to achieve balances in on boards, in companies, in trade unions, in science, in the scientific community, conferences, no more manuals. We need to ensure that there is welfare in society and in companies that put women at the heart of it. France has achieved a lot. Italy has a proposed law. Two questions. How can you support women in the workplace when they're faced with harassment and stalking, including online harassment and stalking? Some states don't recognise such offences. That's not the case in Italy, but it's not Europe-wide. Female entrepreneurs. There isn't really a word for a female entrepreneur in Europe. There are all these social, bureaucratic and legislative obstacles that prevent women entering the workplace.
Thank you, Italy. Who would like to answer? Madame Hubert, you want to answer?
Si vous voulez, oui. Je vais être...
I will try to be as brief as possible. At European level, it's not very well known, but there is a directive on wage transparency. There's a directive on women's access to company boards. There's a directive on the on work-life balance. And these directives are full of resources for you, parliamentarians, and for stakeholders at national level. And at European level, it is designed in this way so that that means that we can only make progress if there's a holistic approach, so focusing on all areas at the same time, including female entrepreneurs.
The following is Eva Maria Holz-Leitner from Austria.
Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a shame that we only have such a short period to discuss such an important issue, and I'd like to highlight that to those organising the debate, because it obviously makes a difference if women are at the negotiating tables. If we talk about, for example, wars, obviously it makes a difference whether women are at the negotiating table when we're talking about budgetary decisions in the member states. And of course it makes a difference whether women are able to be there to shape security and mobility policy. Therefore, it's particularly important to have representation in all policies, not just in parliaments in general, but also in the committees. This is very important. For a few years now in Austria, we have had incentives if political groups consisted of more than 40% women. I think this is a good step. I think we need to have a system of incentives. If we see that political groups are not willing to involve women, if they don't want to do this, then we should impose penalties on them, and they should be excluded from political processes. What's also important is how money is spent. In Austria, we have gender budgeting in constitutional affairs. This is an important step because every euro is important and it can impact on gender equality at all levels. And this gender budgeting needs to be taken into consideration even more at all levels in the future.
Qui veut réagir? Madame Gauchy.
Ms. Gauchy. Thank you. Indeed, you're right. Yes, we need to have gender budgeting in all parliaments. Here in Belgium, we have several parliaments, and the Brussels Federation's parliament has released budgets which are linked to gender. So for every single budget item, there is a line which is focused on gender budgeting. And in this parliament, we have created a he for she parliament, and I think in the French-speaking assemblies there are many female parliamentarians who are asking why we have this he for she parliament. In the Senate and the Chamber of Representatives, Madam President, we've also introduced a gendered budget. This is how we can ensure that everything will be dealt with on an equal basis. Thank you.
Is Robert Troy from Ireland.
Thank you. The lack of female representation at national level is frequently debated. It's important that we continue to highlight this issue, but more importantly that we implement policies until we do have parity of representation between men and women. Males have a role to play too, to ensure that women are not operating in a sexist environment. Historically and culturally it has always been the way of more men than women, and that's why we must have targeted and focused policies to address this issue. In Ireland a number of years ago we implemented a policy which linked state funding on parties running 30% of our candidates as female candidates. The first general election which saw this implemented was 2016, where 31% of our candidates were women, electing 22% of the Parliament, of the overall Parliament membership, which was a 7% increase on the previous general election. Our next general election, this requirement will increase to 40% of all candidates must be women in order for parties to achieve their state funding. The operation of parliaments are quite often not very family friendly. Frequently in Ireland we sit till 10 and 11 o'clock at night. And of course the toxicity of abuse and the evasion of privacy that's experienced by all parliamentarians is something that needs to be addressed. So if I could ask two questions. One, in your experience, what Parliament has done the most to implement family-friendly operational times, etc. And secondly, has there been any engagement with the senior executive of our tech companies to ensure that the online vitriol and toxicity is addressed for women but also for men parliamentarians?
Est-ce qu'il y a une réaction souhaitée?
Would anybody like to react? Let's go now.
But I would like to, since we are having a ping pong, I would like to go to give a ping pong ball back. I know that the Swedish Parliament has done a lot when it comes to work-life balance and working hours. So if we have a representative from Swedish Parliament to share a little bit, would be really good to answer your question on the family-friendly parliaments.
Yes, indeed. Okay. The next one is Adela Shipova from Republic of Czech. De la République tchèque.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm uncomfortable with the narrative upon which this debate rests. Women can vote, women can get elected, and indeed women get elected. There are no barriers to women, and more than 50% of the voters are women. So women's democratic choices are fully represented. If they give more votes to men, it is their choice that needs to be respected. Moreover, why are we dividing politicians by gender? I'm a person with a speech handicap. I'm stuttering, and it is not easy for me to speak in front of people. Why are we not having the same debate for people with a handicap? Why are we not having the debate for people with migration background? There are an infinite number of categories. Last night, the Speaker of the Belgian Parliament gave a speech where she said that the former speakers were all men. This sounds very unfair to men. until you travel south of Brussels to the battlefields of Waterloo and the battlefields of World War I and II, where young men had to die for the freedom of men and women in Europe. And at this very moment, mostly young men are dying in the Ukraine, but not young women. The lives of men are also full of challenges and unfair destiny. Therefore, let's not divide humans into categories which splits us, but let's focus on us as individuals. Let's focus on being competent politicians that represent their voters, fight corruption and defend democracy. Thank you.
C'était donc Monsieur Tom Weidig du Luxembourg.
That was Mr. Tom Weidig from Luxembourg, not Czechia. Madame Leroy, would you like to respond?
Simplement.
Well, I just wanted to say that from the beginning of, from this morning, I feel like we've had a lack of time to talk about something fundamental, which is democracy having to be representative of society, of an egalitarian and inclusive society where everyone has a right to be seen and whose messages are able to be heard. They can represent their lives and their struggle for more rights. So I don't think we've wanted to divide, but I think we've actually wanted to make more progress in terms of equality. Thank you very much. Czechia now. Adela Šipova.
Thank you. I would like to add one point to the thing what was said. Young Ukrainian men are fighting, but Ukrainian women are mining coals at this moment. So this was what I would like to add. Thank you for including the issue of gender policy as one of the 3 chapters of the COSAC reports. It is an important signal, not only for women and men, but also for democracy and the rule of law. I feel I have to speak here on behalf of those women from the Czech Republic who consider the question of gender equality and gender policies of high importance. And there are more and more such women. Czech women are very competent, and what more, young Czech women are even more educated. 60% of university graduates are women. The lack of use of women's skills is demonstrably damaging the economical situation of our country. Yet the participation of Czech women in the public and the political sphere especially needs to be more adequate. The lower chamber has now 25% of female MPs. The situation in the Czech Senate is even worse. We have only 18.5% female senators. In this context, it is maybe not so surprising that Czech Senate did not agree to ratification of the Istanbul Convention. Unfortunately, women don't need to be only valued, they also need to be systematically expelled from the sphere of politics by symbolic and practical obstacles. In our country, the free choices are given de jure, but not de facto. Young women are often burdened with childcare and home care after their studies, while men are rarely called upon to take on their parental responsibilities. Unfortunately, women are no longer able to catch up on their career break. The gender pay gap reaches 16%. I'm sorry. Only 2% of parents on parental leave are fathers. That's why I am convinced that adequate gender policies positively impact society as a whole and can help to achieve a better quality of life for women and men.
I would like to ask if someone want to react.
Just wanted to say that in parliaments and in the federal government in Belgium, we've tried to have measures to cover all the obstacles in terms of wage gap, in terms of equal treatment, but also in terms of work-life balance. parental leave, etc. So it's true that these political measures and these different ways in which women can be politically engaged are linked to the fact that they are encouraged overall with the general policies that a government can put forward. Thank you very much. Next person is Matilda Ernstkrantz. Here comes the Swedish response.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking Swedish today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for dealing with this issue of equality. It's a very important issue, and it's particularly important because there's backtracking when it comes to equality, and we are seeing the rise of the far right. Representation plays a role in the Swedish Parliament. We have equal parity of men and women, but this has actually decreased since 2022 slightly. Hopefully we can set a good example. Since 2006, in the Swedish Parliament, we've worked on representation, not just in parties, but also in the administration. And not just there, but if in a democracy everybody needs to be able to take part in the decision-making process, we started a program to take into account people's private lives and family lives and how this impacts people's work in the Parliament, and how this affects men and women differently. In political life, the atmosphere is increasingly tense. Women are being attacked on social media, for example. We need to have structured work, and I think that there are possibilities in other parliaments. It's about the fact that we have seen backsliding. Perhaps there are other positive examples from other countries. I hope that we can continue as a good example. Thank you.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative. There is still much to do. This is something we notice in our parliaments, where we're trying to trend towards equality, but there are still restrictions in place, such as the status of women when it comes to parental leave or maternity. We haven't really worked on that. A female parliamentarian, after giving birth, and actually this is something we notice in the Walloon Parliament, women would give birth and then a week later they had to return to vote because they were part of the majorities. So there are still topics and files which need to be fought for in the different parliaments for women. Yes, thank you. The next person is Louise Morel from France. You have the floor. Thank you, Chair. For the first time in our history, there isn't one parliament in the world which doesn't have a woman working within it. And also, another good piece of good news, on the 4th of March, the French Parliament met to enshrine, to talk about abortion, and it was headed by a woman. Worldwide, women are getting to positions of leadership, but this is very slow and it's heterogeneous. I'm pleased that my country is playing its part in terms of representing women in the French Parliament. There were 10% women in 1997, and now we are almost equal, so we are definitely moving forward, but a lot of work still needs to be done. In some countries, there is only 1 out of 5 members of parliament which is a woman. So this needs to be taken very seriously by the EU, and of course the EU has a role to play when it comes to improving female representation in our national parliaments. We make up 50% of the population. Therefore, it's not normal that we don't have access to 50% of the responsibilities. solutions do exist. International cooperation, for example. On the 6th and 7th of March, the 25 of the chairs met in Paris, and they were women. And this helps with the visibility of women in politics. And to conclude, women in politics aren't just symbolic. This is a necessity to help countries move in the right direction. We wouldn't have been able to put IVF in the constitution if we didn't have an important representation of women. Thank you for this debate, and thank you to the participants for the quality of their interventions. Thank you very much. I don't think you need a reaction. I think that was just a very positive intervention, so thank you. Anna Leie from Estonia.
Hello, thank you for giving me the floor. It's said that Parliament is a direct representation of the society. As the youngest MP in Estonia, I don't agree with that statement, because if it were true, the amount of young people and women in parliaments would be a lot bigger. Now, we are all preparing for the upcoming European elections, and therefore I would put the continuing inequality in the context of the current European Parliament. In the European Parliament, there are 705 members, of which only less than 300 MEPs are women, and only 6 MEPs are under the age of 30. So looking at the numbers, we can see the inequality in politics clearly. Therefore, I don't understand why some member states would want to cross out the positions regarding women's rights and their inclusion. And the women whose rights we are talking about, they are not an abstract collection of people somewhere far away. They are our sisters, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, colleagues, friends. And women and young people are among the most affected groups in the society by global and local crisis. We see this in Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We see it in the Middle East, and we see it in the context of the global climate crisis. So I would say that until women and young people aren't seen as equal in politics, there is a big part of our societies that are underrepresented. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Reaction? No reaction. Madame Hubert?
Ms. Hubert.
Putting forward the case of young women in particular, and putting forward the case of the European elections as well, which is going to be very crucial, and we really encourage parties to actually sort of present women, more women, and young women as well.
Thank you. Next speaker is Algirdas Sysas from Lithuania. We don't hear you.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Madam Chairwoman. Yes, I do agree with the words of the Senator, who said that the fighting for women's rights should not be only of concern of women. But listening to our debate, I have noticed that it seems that it's the problem that only women care about. So I would like to encourage my colleagues, men, to engage in this debate. Then perhaps we'll be able to achieve better results. Well, I work in the Parliament, which is presided by a woman. I work in the committee, which is chaired by a woman. Our delegation here is chaired by a woman. But unfortunately, we're still behind the situation in the European Parliament. And unfortunately, we have only 40 women out of 141 members of our parliament. And I am a member of the Social Democrats Party, and our party is led by a woman as well, and she is a member of the European Parliament. We are one of those parties in Lithuania that applies quotas, 60% and 40% in all the managerial positions. And we have drafted our candidate list according to the principle that you mentioned, the zipper principle. So we can see that women are getting more and more active in politics. More and more women find their place on our candidate lists. But unfortunately, after the election results, we see that more men than women end up in the parliament. Why is it so? Why even women vote mostly for men? Because I don't believe that men always vote for men. But how can we encourage women to vote for women during the election?
Merci, monsieur. Je voulais revenir à votre...
Yes, thank you. I wanted to address your first question on men needing to fight for gender equality. I actually mentioned this in my intervention at the beginning of this session. We can't get to parity and equality in parliaments if we don't all work together. Men with us as women and women with you as men. Systematically, women don't just vote for women, of course. So the political groups do need to put female candidates forward. So I hope that during the European elections, more parties will put forward the qualities of their female candidates. Thank you. Katerina Notopoulou from Greece.
Vous avez la parole.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I think that from what we heard from our speakers and the colleagues, it is clear that equality of the genders is still something we have to fight for, both in politics as well as in the private sector. So a question is, what would those mechanisms be, those checks and balances from the EU, so that we would have something that we could feel in our everyday life? For example, when we have certain gaps in the Istanbul Convention, or when there is a gender pay gap and we do not have a welfare state that will balance the needs of women. On the other hand, we need to have this guaranteed percentage for women, and we need to move forward with that. But what is today the problem is not so much the participation of women. What is being debated is the respect, this gravitas that is accorded to the opinion of women. So the problem is not so much this glass ceiling, but any kind of ceiling that is against women in politics. And I have a third question that is more concrete. What would those best practices be for women that have, for example, either certain specificities or are women with a handicap or things like that? Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. The bad news is that we should be wrapping up the debate now, so it's important for us to move on quickly and so that everyone can speak. So let's just have the interventions first, and then we'll have the responses as a whole. David Klobasa from Slovenia. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I think that often in the political world we sometimes make things far too complicated. Today we're trying to find solutions to inequality between men and women. And here I'm mostly speaking to my male colleagues in saying that, well, in how many occasions have they owed their position to the fact that a woman wasn't available? Studies show that, well, women do need, of course, to be more present, but we also need to support them. We need to implement measures to reach equality between men and women. We need to create environments where we can respect the dignity of women more. It's important for us to contribute towards their greater autonomy and emancipation. We need to be empathetic And in women, we shouldn't see adversaries, but partners with whom we can share experiences. So let's fight against stereotypes. That will be far better in terms of the values in our society. We can support the women in our society. We can't deny the abilities of women. They are just as able as men, and they should have the same rights and prerogatives as men do. It's only by recognizing all of this that we will be able to create a society which lives up to the high stakes of parity. Let's be an example for the rest of the world. Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, Jan Ferenczak.
Dear colleagues, in Slovak Republic we fully support the gender equality strategy as well as other strategic documents promoting gender equality. When it comes to our national reforms, we are trying to remove all barriers that prevent women from effective participation in society. We believe that the full participation of women in all aspects of public and political life will strengthen and protect the democracy. When it comes to the representation of women in Slovak politics, we understand this as a challenge in terms of gender equality. Therefore, supporting women's political participation become one of the priorities defined in our National Action Plan for Equality between Women and Men and Equal Opportunities for the years 21-27. In this action plan, we focus also on improvement of women's financial inclusion and support of women's employment and decent work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Daniel Riadza from Sweden.
Thank you so much. Jag kommer att tala på svenska. Till att börja.
I'll speak in Swedish. First of all, I'd like to raise a question here to the room. There are many people here representing parties that have been facing issues relating to minorities such as Muslims. And then there's this discussion about equal opportunities, and we say, oh, why haven't we succeeded in making progress with equal opportunities? Well, it's a bit hypocritical. The Prime Minister of Hungary, the former Prime Minister of Poland weren't Muslims or black. Third world countries are facing different challenges, and this talk about feminism is much more prevalent in Western European discourse. Women freedom is a slogan, but giving arms to dictatorships, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all sorts of steps backwards there. So feminism and equal opportunities are an issue for all, but there are double standards being applied. We need to be attentive to that.
Thank you, Pranvera Rezulaj from Albania.
Chair, thank you all the distinguished panelists. Dear colleagues, I'm honored to give my speech here at European Parliament as a member of Albania Parliament, where women represent 35.7%. But let me to share a simple fact. Based on research of Parliamentary Institute, the national parliaments of EU countries with the progress they are running actually needs 28 years to achieve the parliamentary gender equality. But we need to support women in politics today. So, Istanbul Convention, ratified by EU, should be a tool for gender policy. And because digital violence, sexism and hate speech are barriers for women entering in politics, we in Albania are taking initiatives to defend women by psychological and digital violence based on education, sensibilization, institutional support and legal initiatives. Some reinforcement in penal code are preparing, and all these actions are made in close collaboration with academics, media and civil society. And dear colleagues, in conclusion, permit me to strongly repeat the support of Albanian Parliament and Albanian government to the state of Ukraine, which is the example that show us we need to act more and talk less. Because, dear colleagues, sound ironically to talk about digital violence against women in politics or women everywhere, while in Ukraine we do not have just violence, but there we have crime and aggression against women, children and all humanity. Thank you again.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Sona Gazarian from Armenia.
You have the floor.
First of all, let me sincerely express our gratitude to the Presidential Troika and Belgian Parliament for inviting the Armenian delegation to be part of this very important platform. The equal representation of women and men in institutionalized politics has been a very important topic for us, since only with the proportional representation it is possible to reach real democracy. After the Velvet Revolution in Armenia, we made changes in the legal framework to reach, at the moment, 30% of female representation in the parliament and local authorities. First of all, we reviewed the electoral code and upgraded the gender quota up to 30%. Another important step undertaken was changing the law on political parties with a clear message on the importance of having inclusive representation in the governing bodies of the political parties, as we believe political parties are the gates to the institutional politics. The party of majority itself is currently working on its internal policy to introduce gender quotas in its all governing bodies. We are working on ideas to encourage women's participation in a party through the bodies beyond quotas. We believe that legal framework is necessary but not enough. We also need to encourage women, support them, as every woman in institutionalized politics needs to pave the way for the other women to join. I agree with the key speaker, Ms. Gauci. Women's question is not only women's question, it's a question of society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Skippe Isufi from Kosovo. Kosovo?
Yes, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Kosovo,
could you
with
stand
its
up so that we can see you?
Advanced constitution and European orientation, stands as a testament to the enduring spirit of democracy and the relentless pursuit of equality. Our journey, though challenging, highlights the transformative power of inclusive governance and the pivotal role of gender balance in fostering a vibrant democratic society. Kosovo's commitment to gender equality is illustrated through our achievements and the remarkable women who lead by example. The Lëvizja Vetëvendosje parliamentary group, the largest in our assembly, proudly boasts 23 female MPs, which each elected for their dedication and competence rather than merely by fulfilling a quota. Our current president, Mrs. Vjosa Osmani, elected as the most voted candidate in the country, is a resounding affirmation of the progress Kosovo has made in gender equality. Moreover, the presence of 4 women among the top 10 most voted candidates in our last elections further underscores the significant strides we have taken towards leveling the playing field for all. This is a clear indication that when provided with equal opportunities, women are capable of securing their place in politics based on merit. In conclusion, as we share best practices and learn from one another, let Kosovo's experience inspire us all to forge ahead with unwavering determination to achieve a truly inclusive political landscape. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last speaker is Dilja Mist Einarsdottir from Iceland. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues,
gender equality is an important policy priority for the Icelandic government, both domestically and in our foreign policy. Iceland has topped the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index for 14 years in a row, making it the country with the narrowest gender gap in the world. We rank high on women's educational achievement and women's political empowerment. Today, 48% of the parliamentarians in Iceland are women, as well as our Prime Minister. Women, furthermore, chair half of the Parliament's committees. If I were to mention something that has made a big difference for Iceland's status when it comes to gender equality, I would of course mention the importance of active promotion of strong female role models. Maybe the men in the room should listen now. Another thing I would like to mention as a measure to ensure equal participation in political life, as well as other types of work, is the combination of guaranteed daycare and legislation on parental leave. This can be an important factor in ensuring that women have equal opportunities to return to work following childbirth. Provisions should also provide for the parental leave of men. In Iceland, over 90% of men take such leave, which not only supports the return of women to work, but also supports the notion that running the household and raising a child is not the role of women, but a shared obligation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Je vais demander à chacune des
keynote speakers, very, very briefly, please. 30 seconds by the clock. Last word for each of you.
Alors le mot de la fin, ce sera de vous.
My last word. Thanks. Thanks for sharing your experience, your practices in different member states, and what we're trying to do is make up for years, hundreds of years of having patriarchal systems. We need tangible alliances that will help us achieve it. Ms. Gelchi, thank you, Madam President. Thank you for including this on COSAC's agenda. It's a long fight. We've made progress, but there's still a long way to go. And we also have to make sure that we enshrine what we've already got, consolidate it, don't lose it, take small steps forward, and we will make it one day. Ms. Hubert. Today's meeting has shown us that the fight for equality is about fighting for the life of democracy and having a dynamic democracy. There was a Greek parliamentarian who referred to some questions. There are two key priorities, I think, to deal with now. Quotas, absolutely the only way of ensuring that women enter politics, and I can say that from 30 years of experience. We've been hearing this for 30 years. And the second point is that harassment, sexual violence, macho culture in Parliament and outside is discouraging to women, so we have to combat that too. Thank you very much, and it was good now. Last word.
A great discussion this afternoon. 3 points. How to get there, to get equal society. First thing, early education for gender equality. This includes comprehensive sexuality education, which needs to address respective relationships between women and men, addressing gender-based violence, violence against women. Second, tackling gender stereotypes throughout the life cycle. So from early education, as I said, training, choice of career, employment, how we share care at home, and participation in social life, in decision making. 3, it might sound boring, but this is the task of the parliaments. Legislative framework. We have very good experiences. We have heard quite many already today. So, and last but not least, role models. And here, role models, not only women, strong women fighting for gender equality, but as well men as allies, as agents for change. Thank you.
Vous avez magnifiquement résumé.
Well done. I think we've had an excellent overview there of what has been achieved and what remains yet to be done. Thank you all very much for your participation, particularly our panellists up here on the podium. It's been a significant session. I'd like to thank all female parliamentarians and indeed male parliamentarians who have been seen and heard in this debate too, and that's very important too. The text of the final declaration will be submitted for a more gender-sensitive parliament. That text will be submitted to you before the end of our work, and I urge you to support it. I invite the chairpersons of delegations to stay put as we continue with the COSAC chairpersons meeting. I take my leave of the other members of the delegations, but I would ask you to keep both badges. Keep your Belgian presidency badge, which you'll need all the time, and keep your European Parliament accreditation badge, without which you won't be able to enter the European Parliament tomorrow. So don't lose it. And don't forget to bring your personal magnetic card with you. We'll see you at the Tour et Taxi site this evening for dinner. Have a very good journey back if you are leaving the room. And to chairpersons of delegations, I'll see you in a few minutes when we resume. Thank you.